United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Recording in progress. Recording stopped.
Welcome everybody. While we wait a few minutes for Dr. Gallagher to come back, I would just like to give a big shout out to our summer school. The Board of Ed was able to go have a lovely visit to the summer school at Lindell and to Lido. We got to see many of our motivated students working hard throughout the summer, and they were very engaged in all of their activities.
I think we can probably go right to the activity.
Yeah, we can go. Oh, okay. We're going to go right into our presentation, and we're going to welcome our report of the internal auditor.
Okay, good evening. My name is Sherry Diamond. I am a partner at Sweeney & Associates, we have district's internal auditors. We have two reports that we would like to discuss this evening, which is our updated risk assessment report for the 2021-2022 school year, as well as our focused area test that we have to present. Every year we have to do a focused area test, and that is for also the 2021-2022 school year. We always perform some level of a risk assessment every year. We did a detailed one back in the 2020 school year. The report was issued back in December of 2019. I just want to remind everybody that the internal audit function assesses the current environment and controls, and therefore it should be a fluid process and adaptable to changes. So that was before COVID-19 came down, along with the mandates. And, we really have to kind of be flexible with the risks that are out there, that mandates and other changes that are may be coming down the pipe. So for the current risk assessment, it's a pretty quick report that we issued this past year. It always looks at staffing changes that are happening within the district. We look at key individuals, especially in the business office department. Again, we had noticed some changes in the staffing, especially that impact some of the key business function areas, such as accounting, purchasing, accounts payable, and payroll. We noticed that have changed in management of food services. Again, we go through interviewing people to gain an understanding of the roles and responsibilities as it impacts the internal control structure. We also look at the Board of Ed minutes. We also look at new and revised policies. There was a new required policy that needed to be implemented, 5633, which is documented in that report as well. And the district is proactive in reviewing policies on a regular basis. We always look at changes in the IT environment and always have a discussion every year, at least twice a year actually. And there's so many changes that impact the district from a technology perspective, to compliance with NY2D, as well as cybersecurity protocols implemented to reduce risks of attacks and breaches. A couple of other things that we look at every year is your management letter that's going to be talked about by your external auditors. There were new risks identified. We also look at the district's claims auditor's reports that are produced on a monthly basis. There were new risks identified there as well. External factors, just so that you understand, we are culling information from a lot of different sources, such as NISBA, the School Board of Art Association, ASBO, OSC, the State Society, CPA, Institute of Internal Auditors, as well as any other sources. And then we always have to do a focused area test every year. That's part of the internal audit requirement. This year is a review of additional pay, and that was because of staffing changes and just of risks that are associated with that area. And that was noted during our assessment, and it's in your risk assessment reports. I am going to quick. Were there any questions on the risk assessment report that we did to the past school year? Yes.
I guess just for my own clarification, with the pandemic, in terms of the virtual learning and people calling in terms of work, what do you recommend going forward in terms of that? I mean, I suspect filing units, and that may come up even today at this meeting, we're going to look for virtual days in terms of not coming in and maybe working from home in terms of that. And is there risk involved in that in terms of the documentation of it, in terms of the procedures that need to be followed, in terms of allowing such?
Well,
That's-
it's a pretty big question, there's a lot of components to that, answer. Obviously, there are collective bargaining agreements that are overarching agreements with everybody in employees. Your biggest employee group is teachers, so you have to really work on that to make sure that it is documented and approved by legal, to make sure. But when we did that review of attendance in the district, that was also to capture how the district was addressing certain attendance and documentation procedures when you're working in a virtual environment. From my understanding and reading, and this again is just really my opinion from reading different articles, Ed Week, which is a national publication, I'm not really quite seeing that schools are gonna really be benefiting from complete virtual. So I think this is just gonna be another discussion. I think that you should be prepared to be able to turn back on a dime and understand what the documentation and internal control structure still need to be in place at that time. There's a lot that goes
Yeah,
on.
I'm just concerned,
Depends who.
I'm just concerned in terms of exposing ourselves to issues that might come up with auditors, might come up with Napoli. I'm just concerned about that.
That's the Napoli, we actually do review their reports.
Yeah,
And we're trying to see what they're kind of going after.
I also want to ask a question concerning claims. Do you find that compared to other districts that we have as many sort of red flags in terms of no purchase orders requested or kinds of, look at the other side in terms of policies concerning, we all understand emergencies come up to school districts, and you gotta get the flowers for the fifth grade moving up, otherwise you're gonna hear it from the parents, you
Right.
get that claim form. But when there's a big claim form in terms of that, you see that we're in any,
No, you have a lot of layers of oversight when it comes to your purchasing and approval of purchases in the district, so we're not seeing it, maybe it doesn't conform to some of the ways we wanted,
Right.
You're a larger district, a decentralized environment, so, when we review those reports, we're looking for any of those instances that come up that might fall, it might cause us to have a further dialogue, but we're not really seeing that, and we're not seeing compared to other districts that is.
Good.
Um,
my next question concerns timesheets.
okay,
In terms of that, and I was just concerned in terms of, your recommendation made perfect sense in terms of standardization of costs in our buildings, in terms of policy and procedure.
right. So that's the other report, just so that you understand, he's referencing the additional pay report. Sure, and I was just gonna walk you through that really quick, but if you want me to take that question now.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I was certainly also sort of concerned about the specific reference to West, in terms of West, why that was cited in terms of good behavior, is sort of maybe.
Well, it was as far as documentation and the flow of information,
Right.
and the type of information that was being documented, so we kind of felt that it was complete and accurate, which is really what we kind of go on. And, we felt that the processes and procedures that were happening in that building, probably should be emulated in the other buildings, at least should be standardized, which is, I think we could all agree that we should all be on the same page, even if we're not, operating the same, on the same page.
My other question was the 24 employee timesheets.
Yes.
Not indicating,
Right,
reason for coverage and whatever.
it's on page
expense.
3, there's
Was that any specific department?
No, not necessarily. I can go back and give you the details of the test results.
Yeah, I'd be concerned in terms of among those 24 where they fell.
We don't want to give it an impression that it was egregious,
Right,
that there was some, it wasn't really practice here
Right.
to do it. So, I think that just is what needs to be changed, where you start documenting this information.
Right.
But yeah, we have that information.
All right, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So just to kind of bring you up, if there's no questions on the risk assessment, I'm just going to.
Yeah, I just have one quick question. Why isn't it signed by someone?
It's signed by the firm.
But a firm can't sign something, like there's no signature for a firm.
Right, but.
Someone signs on behalf of the firm.
Yeah, we've kind of gone back to different, I defer because we've been informed that it's okay for us to sign this agreement. The Associates District is hiring the firm as its internal auditors and it's being issued through us, but, I defer to,
Well, it's not my decision, but I just think Srini and Associates LLP is not a signature. Like, you might make a signature, but that's not a signature. Okay, just saying.
no, I mean, that's a good point. I'll bring it back to the other partners. You know, we can always
Yeah, if
put,
there's a reason, I just be
Something-
interested to know.
that's just how we've always done it. It doesn't mean that it's always done that way. Going forward, I don't want to put you on the spot, but, I see counsel, so I'm like, well, is there a legal jurisdiction over that? Or-
I haven't looked at the issue,
Okay.
so I'd be
Okay.
happy to if the board would like.
We'll definitely take it back and we can discuss it with, several different district attorneys as well that we work with, so be happy to do that. Okay, so that's the risk assessment report, the, additional pay report. Obviously, the reason that we were looking at this was, a change in staffing and that could impact risk in the district. So we wanted to make sure that, you know, an area such as payroll and just, specifically additional pay, that area is a new set of employees that were going to be working in that area. We wanted to make sure that there was sufficient internal controls over those additional pays, which include overtime pays, extra pay, differential pay, anyone who's being paid on a lag pay basis. How do we do that? We always do interviews. We actually did a shadow. We spent the day shadowing and documenting policies and procedures that they were following. And then we looked at the bargaining unit contracts as well as any other district policies and procedures that were in place that would speak about contractual pays or pay obligations with respect to additional pay. Then we did some testing. We selected 60 additional payments from the May 27th, 2022 payroll. And we're basically testing whether the payments were accurate or correct, whether there's appropriate documentation that was maintained to support the payments, such as the timesheets, and that the payment was coded to the correct general ledger code account. Overall, I would say we had really good favorable results. Everybody was always very cooperative and very attentive to any questions that we had in getting us information. We did note one instance where an individual was paid at the incorrect rate, they were underpaid. We noted that there were some manual processes that were being performed and recommended to utilize the system so that it could reduce the risk of manual errors. And this is something we're going to be working together with the district, and we have a plan in place for that. We did talk about standardizing the timesheets so that they are consistent across all buildings, ensuring payments are only made from approved timesheets. Really, that could be done by sending the timesheets electronically rather than trying to wait for the paper forms to come through, indicating the reason for the coverage and who the employee who the sub is covering, and then creating that extra pay budget code recommendation that we focus on. And that was a very focused area report, again, specifically related to the risks that we had identified in the district. Was there any
So are
questions?
you creating the approved timesheets together with the district?
We don't steer the ship, so to speak, but we will definitely, work together to make sure that it's checking all the boxes that we think it should be, yes.
Okay.
So that's a good question. So for the 2022-23 school year, which we already just started, and some of those kind of going, obviously, we're gonna continue with updating the risk assessment, we're in the process of doing that now. That includes looking at staffing changes, IT policies and procedures, external audit claims, audit, and any other external factors that may be coming down the line.
Just one more question about the timesheets. Will they be ready by September?
This is with the district, so I think where we talked about that with the district, I think they talking about December 31st, 2022 is the planned completion date. So where we can get it to be started, they can. I mean, again, this is really up to how fast and how well we can get this communicated and solidified. We're here to help.
Right.
To help you push it along. Yeah, I'd love it to be by September.
It would that, so is it priority or you do have till December 31st?
Right, this is, the management's responsible for plan completion
Okay.
from the district. Right. But if it can get done faster, then that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, certain things that can really kind of readily control, certain things they may have to make sure that they get together with everybody to complete the entire implementation.
Okay.
We do like to give some time. This report does have to get filed with the state, so with the compliant completion date, just, I would say be prudent. I don't know what the state's doing with this information, so that's that. So just to let you know what we're doing now, so again, with the risk assessment, we're also going to be assessing job functions within the HR department to see where the district may be able to gain efficiencies and streamline functions, similar to what we did in the business office area. Continue to monitor any open recommendations that we're going to follow up on the review of benefits, special education revenue and expenditures, and the review of technology that we did. Again, to give a little bit of time for the review of attendance. The focus test area, we are a preliminary discussion, but I'm going to leave it out there. On the risk assessment that we performed, and I think it might still be an appropriate area to test, barring anything else that comes up. But that would be to do a full review of payroll, since there are going to be a lot of changes, and it might make sense to do the review of like all contractual pay, not just that specific area and that lens.
So if I can interject here just as a way of reference for the Board of Education. So the updated risk assessment is something that our internal auditors do on an annual basis, and like a check-in on different areas, and then each year they'll focus on a few areas. So Ms. Don is suggesting that maybe just a little deeper focus on payroll, right? In addition to what you said, there's a review of the HR roles and responsibilities and staff function areas there. But if the board has any areas that they'd like some more information about, that you don't have to get the answer now, but it's something to consider. And then, it's something that we have a conversation with our internal auditors about, and then it's a function of hours, right? Typically, your contract weighs about 30 hours. Am I right? In terms of 50, what is that standard in terms of?
For how many hours we work in the district? Oh, it's a lot.
Okay. So that would be the limitation in terms of the hours in the budget, right? In terms of the scope of what we want in that focus area. So the purpose of today's meeting is annually they come in, they report on the work that they've done over the course of the year into that updated risk assessment on, again, those standard areas that they have to take a look at, and then that focus area. So next year, this time, they'll be able to report to the board in similar fashion, updated risk assessment and whatever focus areas they did over the course of the year. So perhaps, they'll get started with the two areas that they've mentioned, payroll and HR, and then they'll give us a sense of what the budget is, how much they spent so far, and then the board can determine if they'd like them to do anything further. Does that sound okay?
Yes, that's the.
Okay.
We'll keep you posted if there are changes, obviously. That's it, and I will find out about this.
Great.
Absolutely. Anything other than that?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. So, Board of Education, the next part of the audit committee is a report from our external auditor. And the purpose of this section of the meeting is for Ms. Sanders to discuss the plan for the audit of our financial statements. So we're just at the point now where we're closing the books. I know I've been updating the board with no weekly updates of where we are as we wrap up the 21-22 fiscal year. We prepare the financial statements in collaboration with Colin Danowski and Ms. Sanders. Are you there?
She's muted.
Yes, I am.
Okay, good evening, Ms. Sanders. We're ready for you to begin your part of the audit committee, where you discuss with the board the upcoming plan to audit our financial statements for the 2022 close of that fiscal year.
Okay, great. Thank you for inviting me to the meeting this evening. Sharing my screen, does the Board of Education see it?
Yes.
Great, okay, thank you. So I'm going to walk through what we are going to do as far as the audit plan for this fiscal year. And what I'm going to cover is going to be on the second page, the objectives of the engagement, what an audit engagement is. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on some of these pages because I know the board is very seasoned in understanding the process that we go through, but just as a reference to those areas that I may not get the chance to spend a lot of time on, I at least wanted to reference them in the overview. Our responsibilities, the district's responsibilities, what our approach is, our timetable, who the team is, and some recent developments. So in moving to the next slide, our engagement as the Board of Education is aware is to determine an opinion on the financial statements, whether or not they're fairly presented in accordance with the standards, which are accounting principles, generally accepted in the United States of America. Because the school district expends at least $100,000 in federal funds, they are subject to what's known as the audit in accordance with government auditing standards, or the Yellow Book audit. And this is an audit whereby we look at financial reporting and compliance with laws and regulations. The State Education Department, under bullet number 3, wants your external auditor to express an opinion on the financial statements of the extra classroom activity funds. And the Board of Education remembers that this is a cash basis report, very much different than the general purpose financial statements, whereby we capture by club or activity the receipts and disbursements, starting with the opening balance for each of the approved clubs and activities and ending with the ending balance. And there's about somewhere in the neighborhood of about $80,000 worth of funds that flowed through these clubs and activities during fiscal year 2021. The district is the recipient of a significant amount of federal funding. Most recently, we know that under COVID and the education stabilization funding, that level increased even further. So our single audit looks at the fact that you expended more than $750,000, and actually the amount that was expended in fiscal year 2021 was a little bit over $4 million, of which during that year about $1.5 million was COVID related. And because of that, you are required under Single Audit Act and the OMB Uniform Guidance to have what's known as a federal single audit, whereby we identify major federal programs and look at the compliance over the internal controls and the financial reporting. So the audit engagement, I'm going to skip over this page if I can, because I think the board understands you just had your internal auditor present, I believe. So the internal auditor's function is really to look at the overall risk assessment of the district's financial control structure, and then identify with the Board of Education's input, what areas you would like the internal auditor to look at. You have an internal claims auditor appointed by the Board of Education that looks at every claim that gives rise to a cash disbursement. And so my role, as you know, is a little bit different, to opine on the financial statements, give an opinion. We do look at the reporting that's produced by both your internal claims auditor and the internal auditor. We do interview both the internal claims auditor and the internal auditor, not to rely on the work that they do, but to make a determination as to whether or not we need to expand our procedures based on anything that has been reported. And as the Board of Education knows, we're looking at an examination of the transactions based on the population at large, and that's done on a sample basis, because we know there's a tremendous amount of financial activity for the school district. On page 5 then, the standards have not changed, on my slide 5 actually. Same standards that apply as the previous years. I am responsible for communicating any significant matters directly to the Board of Education. I have not in my engagements with the board in the years past have had to do that, but I do work for the Board of Education, and so that is who I am responsible for reporting to. And always we maintain independence and an attitude of professional skepticism. And I changed the staffing around a little bit. You'll see that when we get to that page. And this is a way of really re-looking at the internal control structure and getting some additional input and maybe perhaps addressing things from an audit standpoint in perhaps a little bit different way. So on the next slide, this is pretty straightforward, the district's responsibilities. I'm not going to go through this, but I want to talk about the audit methodology and approach, because this is really important. So with a voluminous amount of transactions and the fact that we're auditing from a sample is representative of the population, we have to start with planning and risk assessment, and it's understanding the major internal control cycles. And you'll see off to the right on this slide, as you would expect, payroll being the largest expenditure of the school district, and benefits, as in all school districts. That's a really key area of the audit process. Purchasing and cash disbursements, cash receipts and cash collections, your accounting information system as it relates to the accounting software that you're using, bank reconciliations and all the related cash receipts, transactions and wire transfers, journal entries and budget transfers. So if we had to rank in order of importance, these would be the 6 that would be at the top. There are obviously other areas that we're looking at, such as the COVID-related funding, any kind of special aid related grants that you received during the year. And so how do we do this? We actually sit with each of the staff and gain an understanding of what they do. And we document those procedures in the form of an internal control structure, make a determination as to whether or not the structure is an efficiently operating structure and it's appropriate for the transactions. As I mentioned, we do, in the next two bullets, we do go ahead and utilize the reporting and communication of both the internal auditor and the internal claims auditor. If there are any communications from the state education department or the federal or state or the other state agencies, we will evaluate those as they relate to the financial statement audit. We've gone ahead and reviewed the board minutes up through the end of May. And then we actually do some preliminary analytical review of budget to actual results. So once we go ahead and we perform those, the planning and the risk assessment, and we make a determination as to whether or not we can rely on the internal control structure that's in place, then we decide how we're going to audit. How are we going to substantiate account balances and those transactions that flow through the financial records of the school district? Because we want to make sure not only that the figures that we're looking at June 30th are representative of the transactions, but you, the Board of Education, receive information, financial reporting during the year. We test that, we examine that to make sure that that's representative also on a sample basis of the transactions for the school district. And so what we'll look at from an audit area standpoint would be, again, payroll and related liabilities. And we test things such as on a sample basis from a broad selection of employees under different bargaining unit contracts and employment arrangements with the school district, compensation that's paid, benefits that are paid, to make sure that that makes sense based upon the underlying documentation. Any billings for services provided, and so you do have quite a bit of tuition services that you collect money for. Is that calculation correct, and is the revenue being recognized and the receivable correctly reported? The Board of Education fortunately has some reserves that they've established in accordance with general municipal law and the capital reserve in accordance with education law. So we'll look at board authorization for those transactions and do a budgetary authorization to make sure that the activity that's depicted there is proper. Capital projects expenditures, you have transfers that you incorporate in your budget and you have your capital reserve. So we'll go ahead and we'll look on a sample basis at the underlying documentation for the expenditures that are contained in the capital project fund. The district uses, as all school districts do, a capital asset inventory system that's maintained by a third party. And so we'll look and see whatever fixed asset acquisitions have taken place, whether or not they're included in that inventory system for record keeping purposes, and any dispositions declared by the Board of Education if they've been removed. The full accrual of GASB 34 financial statement has a number of long-term liabilities that you're required to report. We know that the Board of Education is adequately funding through the budget for these current year expenditures each year. But yet there's, for this particular presentation, on the accrual basis, the professional standards require us to report every liability, whether or not it's paid out of the subsequent year's budget or 5 or 10 or 15 years from now's budget. And so I have a list here of some of the items that we actually audit, and most of this information comes from third-party information, actuarially calculated. For example, the OPEB liabilities, which, as we know, is the other post-employment benefit liability. There's an actual study done based upon the number of employees and retirees by an actuary, bearing in mind the current healthcare costs, trending that out, and looking at a discount rate. And so that actuarial information that's reported on, we evaluate whether or not the assumptions are in accordance with the standards and that the information is reported correctly. Same thing with workers' compensation, because the school district is self-insured for workers' compensation. There's an actuarial report that's rendered for that. And so we'll evaluate that from an audit standpoint. And same thing with the pension information from both the local and employees retirement system and the teachers retirement system. The district has other long-term debt that you're providing for out of your budget each and every year. you have the energy performance contract, which according to the minutes that I looked at, it looks like you refinanced that during this past fiscal year. You have some bonds that you're paying down, so we'll look at that information to see about the reporting for that. And then once we have all of the numbers in place, we do what's known as analytical review. So we're looking at budget to actual information for both revenues and expenditures. And we're looking at reporting information for this year versus last year to see trends and whether or not there's any additional audit procedures that need to be done based upon that information. Once I'm complete with the audit process, I again will come to the Board of Education with the reports in draft at a time that's convenient for you. And I will present the financial statement, the communication to the board, which is the communication under AUC 260, where we tell you what we did and if we had any difficulties in performing the audit, which we did not last year. A management letter, which we had provided to the school district with some recommendations during the previous year. And then there were no significant deficiencies to be reported. These would be high-level internal control-related matters under AUC 265. So that communication was not made to the Board of Education, but if there was such a thing to communicate, I would be presenting that. And then subsequent to my meeting with you, I can go ahead and release our reporting to the Office of the State Controller, and then the school district will, with my report, submit their information to the State Education Department. And then that is due by, at the outside date, November 15th, October 15th is the first date, really. And then the federal single auditors always do 9 months after the close of the year, and that's typically a separate process because this is more of a compliance type audit. So we typically render this reporting during the first quarter of the subsequent year. Any questions on that so far? So on the next slide then, this is the timetable. So the district was good enough to let us come in during the week of April 11th to perform the audit planning and risk assessment phase. And this is where we're evaluating the controls. So we're understanding what the controls are. We're performing a walkthrough to make sure that we're performing the same procedures that someone else is telling us they perform and coming to the same outcome and concluding that it's an effective internal control that's in place. The week of September 12th, once the books and records are closed, we'll come back to the district and perform the substantive testing phase. And during the conclusion of that cycle, we will start to go ahead and assist the district in drafting the financial statements. And then I will come and present the reports to the board at your convenience, as I mentioned before, and I did mention the federal single audit deadline. So my team this year is a little bit different. I think it's good to rotate team staff. The supervisor has been with me probably about 16 years, the staff accountant a number of years. And I do also have a co-partner on this account, Michael Leone. Michael has had about 25 years worth of experience. So the three individuals will be assisting me in performing the audit. Any questions on that?
No. Any questions?
I'm sorry?
No, we're good. Please.
Okay, good. So 2 other quick things. Thank you for giving me as much time as you have. So there are 2 things that will impact this year's financial statement reporting. GASB 87 is lease reporting or the right to use an asset. So the district has a number of arrangements, the larger ones with BOCES, as you would expect, to utilize technology and line-kind equipment. And the standards now say that the entity needs to evaluate that right to use, give it a present value based upon an incremental discount rate, and report that liability and report that right to use on an amortized basis over its useful life. So you will see this year on the financial statements some differences in the way that leases are picked up. And I think it'll be easier once we have the financial statement to work with and we actually have numbers there that relate to the district's transactions to go through that. Michael DeVito and his staff and I have been working on compiling this information and utilizing this information because there's a platform that's being used through a third party whereby the information is input and then the output obviously has to be validated and make sure that it's acceptable in accordance with the standards. Okay? The other item that's going to be impacting the financial statement is Statement on Auditing Standards number 134. And this has to do with the way that the report reads. And so you might remember in the 2021 financial statement and in financial statements that I've been auditing for as long as I can remember, we went through according to the professional standards in the first paragraph telling you what we audited. And it wasn't until the top of the last page of our report that we told you what our opinion was, okay? And so the standard said, we'd like you to be a little bit clearer with the person who's reading your report. So the new report will read, the first paragraph will tell you what we audited, and then the second paragraph will tell you our opinion. So it's very clear within that second paragraph whether or not we have an unmodified and we feel it fairly presents, or a modification or qualification in the opinion. The next section of the report will tell you why we came to that conclusion or the basis for the opinion, management's responsibilities in the next section, and then the final section is our responsibility. And the reporting talks a little bit what an audit under generally accepted auditing standards involves. Exercising professional judgment, understanding the internal controls, looking at risk of material misstatement. So there's a number of things that need to be considered and reported in the auditor's report. Questions?
No. You've been very thorough. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the time this evening.
Yes. Not for Mrs. Sanders, for either you or Dr. Vito. I assume that that's a required presentation by the external auditor, because it basically just tells us what she's going to do, and then she comes back in October and tells us what she did. So I'm wondering if this is required by law.
Mr. Vito, I believe it is, correct?
I believe it is something that's standard, and I know that she says, and I think I asked her once before, and she said that it was something that's, I couldn't say it's required by law to do research myself, but I know from her standpoint, it's something she needs to come.
And when she comes in October, will she come in person?
If you would like that, she may.
Well, I'm just.
You know what I'm saying, if the board requests that her do it in person, we can make that arrangement. I know over the past couple of years, she's requested to do it remotely, but I think if the board were to ask her to do it in person, I'm sure she would try her best to accommodate that request.
Great, thank you.
Report of the superintendent of schools.
Thank you, Mrs. Conway. I do not have a report tonight, but I did ask Mr. DeVito if he would update the board in light of the recent news story about fuel costs in district transportation, on where we are with that, and in particular, our movement towards electric buses.
Thank you, Dr. Gallagher. As the board may remember, when I did the presentation on transportation during our budget process, I had mentioned that over the summer I was going to be spending some more time looking into whether we felt that now is the right time to start moving forward with electric buses. And we have this wonderful consultant who has been advising us over the past couple of years in terms of how to take advantage of different grant programs, rebate programs. And one that she brought to my attention is that there is a grant that we may apply for $250,000 towards the purchase of an electric bus. The electric bus right now is running about $400,000, and just to have some context with that, the CNG buses that we typically purchase are half that, about $200,000, and the diesel gasoline bus is $120,000, so even cheaper than that, and then the small buses are about $60,000. So the electric buses are still high in terms of the marketplace, but if we can receive some of this grant money of $250,000, then it does bring it more along the lines of what a CNG or diesel electric, gasoline bus is. One of the other requirements of the program is we have to trade in an old bus. So we would trade in one of our old CNG buses and then allow us to take advantage of this grant. She also has confirmed for me that the technology of the new electric buses now is something that is reliable enough for us to try out over the past couple of years. And the way she puts it, that the prototypical bus was not something we wanted to rely upon because it wasn't fully vetted, so to speak. But she feels that now the buses are not as prototypical as they were over the past 2.5 years. She feels that we can get more bus, get the charger station, that wouldn't be that expensive. Again, there's some grant funds that are available for that. And I said that, I would like to go forward with the program, with the application, and we can see what it's like, we can try it out for the next year, hopefully we get approved, and then we can determine to what degree we want to move forward with more electric buses. Just one interesting thing that I just want to alert the board to is that the governor, I think it was the governor, had recently said that by 2027, there shouldn't be any more purchases of buses that are not electric because of the carbon footprint. But what may not be known at the state level, or the state executive level, is that the carbon footprint for our CNG buses is actually lower than the electric bus. And since we're the only district in New York State at this point that has the CNG bus fleet, it's something that may not be known. So I'd like to start lobbying, for lack of a better word, just getting that information to the governor's office, because there may be a carve out for other types of green fleets like ours, where the carbon footprint is actually lower than it is with the electric buses. I know that by 2035, they're not allowed to have any more of those non-electric buses on the road, so by 2027, you can't purchase them. So I think the fact that we've invested in the CNG technology, I don't want to necessarily abandon that, especially since it has a lower carbon footprint. So I'd like to do some work over the next year or so in terms of maybe getting a card out for the CNG bus programs, but still I think it's helpful for us to start with an electric bus, see what our experience is, and then see if maybe in the future we want to do some sort of a combination. Thank you very much for the opportunity to report.
Thank you, Mr. DeVito. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
I just have one quick question. Is it okay if I ask it?
Of course.
You mentioned, I'm glad, thank you, and I am very supportive of this, so thank you so much for updating us. I'm just curious, so you mentioned the 250,000 for the bus, but then you said there's additional grant money for the charging stations. My question is, do we have the capability to set up those charging stations at an electric, or does it kind of start opening up a can of worms once you do that? And then my second question is, how many, if you have is it one charging station per bus, and once we have this one charging station, if we have more fleets, how many more charging stations would we need, do you know?
So what I do know is that there are two types of charging stations. One is called a Level 2 charger, and that's for overnight, and it's not as expensive. And then there's a fast charger that's about 3 times the cost. So we're talking about 20,000 versus about 65,000. So the fast charge, you use more than one bus on that fast charge. If you do the Level 2, which is a slower charger, that would be the one because it's overnight. So I'm suggesting that we start with the overnight, hook that up, and we're still looking into what the requirements are to set up the station. We spoke today about this issue as well with the team that we have assembled, and we were talking about whether we can be where the other buses are, or whether we want to be closer to the road because of if we have to bring in extra cabling or electric to come in. So we're exploring that part of it now. As long as the board is comfortable with us moving forward with the application, we can work out the charging elements, afterwards.
Great, thank you so much.
Michael,
Thank you.
one question I have on that, we're not gonna charge the electric buses with gas-powered fuel sources, right? We use a solar, that we have?
That's a good point. I mean, hopefully we're not using anything gas powered, and it could be something that's sustainable.
Good question,
Yeah.
how we can power it?
Yeah. I know we have opportunities for solar, especially over there, because there aren't any trees blocked.
Thank you, Mr. DeVito. Any other Board of Education comments on tonight's agenda only?
Yeah, I just have two. First, I just want to thank Mr. DeVito and Mrs. Ramirez, because I don't know how you do it with all these controllers and audits going on at the same time. On top of the two that were presented tonight, we have Mr. DiNapoli's office from Albany auditing the district. And I particularly thank you, given the turnover of staff in your office. I wouldn't want to be in there answering their questions. I'm glad you're there rather than myself. And as for the electric buses, for the last 3 years, I brought this issue up when we looked at the budget. And I'm glad that we're now considering it because I think it's not overdue. Thank you.
Any other Board of Education comments? Okay. Any student organization announcements? Questions and comments from the public on tonight's agenda only? Okay, Treasurer's report for May 2022. Motion? No motion, we don't need a motion. Oh, approval of minutes for executive session of reorganization and regular meeting of July 5th, 2022. May I have a motion?
Motion. Second.
Dr. Ryan?
Any discussion? No discussion?
No, any discussion?
I vote yes.
Ms. Faith? Yes. Ms. Verona?
Yes.
Mr. Pinto?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Presentations of the superintendent?
I've asked the board to consider item 1, certificated personnel.
Motion.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I just want to congratulate Dr. Romanelli on this appointment. You've often said in your time here, Dr. Romanelli, how much you love this community. Well, that affection is certainly reciprocated because many of the people with whom I've spoken, whether they're students or parents, have expressed great happiness for you, but sadness for us. So I want to thank you for all the contributions you've made during your time here, and wish you every success as you move up to West Iceland. And I also want to, and that's it. Just want to congratulate you. Thank you. Thank you.
I second that. Thank you, Mr. Dr. Bruno.
Ms. Pace, Ms. Verona? Good. Dr. Romanelli, I would also like to echo that. I think one of my fondest memories are going to be the huge dolphin that you made at the middle school all those years ago. That was truly remarkable. Thank you and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
May I have a motion?
We already have.
Oh, we have a motion. We need a vote.
I second it.
We already had discussion.
We had a discussion. Dr. Ryan?
I vote yes on everything but one R. I vote no on one. Right along. I'm fishing for one
Oh,
maybe.
Ms. Pace? Yes. Ms. Verona?
Yes.
Mr. Pinto?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
And I'd like to introduce Katrina Rossi Fuchs, who is new pre-K and program. Item number 2, non-certificated personnel.
Motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Pace?
Yes.
Ms. Verona?
Yes.
Mr. Pinto?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
And I'd ask the board to consider items 3 through 12 together.
Motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Dr. Ryan?
I vote yes. You'll get it, Mrs.
I will.
Buckley.
Ms. Pace? Yes. Ms. Verona?
I vote yes.
Mr. Pinto?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Any additional new old business?
Yeah, can I just get an update on summer school, children, how it's going and how they survived the heat down there and will be here?
Yes, it is going well. We checked in on them yesterday, and they were fine. We actually checked Friday just to make sure that, they still felt that they could stay up under the heat. We are going to move these exams to the middle school library, just to be sure that they're really comfortable with that, but they're doing.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question on our food service initiative, farm to table. How's it going, Mr. Vito?
Well, we definitely hope to expand in the fall. I know that Mr. Swan and I have been in touch with the people who, have organized this farm to school. We had a very successful launch with the strawberries in June, and we're going to see what other opportunities we have. So also not only add it to our menu, but also do something where the kids have a better understanding of what it means to have something locally grown, and do some work with the classroom teachers and some, literature posters and things of that in the cafeteria itself. So we're excited about the possibilities to include some of these locally grown items on the menu, whether it's, as like an added food or vegetable that's on the tray, like we did this past June, or something that's an ingredient and something else that's, part of a regular breakfast or lunch. I don't know, I would also, I don't want to jump the gun, but there's another issue I'd also like to talk about with the board regarding food services in terms of meal prices.
That's my question.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. DeVito. Can I go next?
thank you.
On a related note, on the other end of the meal plan spectrum, I have read that while the free lunch program was extended for the summer, that it will end on October 1st. You have sent us out some information about how much we charge for lunch and how much we pay for lunch and how much we get reimbursed for lunch. So I don't know if it's a question for you, Mr. DeVito, although you might want to give us that information again. I think my question is more a question for the board. I think you've recommended that we think about raising the price of our school lunch. I guess my only question for you would be, when was the last, I don't think it's been raised in the time I've been on the board.
It's been a while since we raised it. It has been since I've been here, so I'm not, we raised it maybe about 9 years ago.
And this is my name.
So I am recommending that we do raise the price of breakfast and lunch. I would like to have 2 different price levels based on the elementary students at the middle school and high school. And what I'm suggesting is that we go from $3 for lunch across the board to $3.50 for the elementary students and $4 for the middle school and high school. Breakfast is now $1.25, and I would just go for $1.50 for the elementary, and I think we said $2, right, for the middle school and high school. And what that does is it just does 2 things. It helps us keep pace with some of the rising costs over the past few years in terms of food costs, because that's really been our biggest price increase. Our labor, overall labor has gone down, benefits have gone down, but the food costs have gone up. And it also just narrows the gap between the reimbursement that we get from the government for lunch. Like, for example, we're getting, if it's somebody who qualifies as free, over $4.50. So that's what the federal government does, reimburse us. But yet, if it's a paid student, we're only charging $3. So there's a disparity there, yeah.
I guess that's one of my questions. Why would we not raise it to $4.60 if the federal government is willing to pay reimbursement, then it costs more than $4.60 to produce
I
the
think
lunch.
it's a big one. I think the federal government is trying to do 2 things. One is it's trying to help school districts because they know that, it's a bit of a struggle to make ends meet when it comes to school food services program. So they're trying to help out a little bit. It's not just that that's where the costs are, that's where they get reimbursed. The other thing is nationally, the average price to charge for paid students is $3.30. And some of our neighboring school districts are between $3 and $4. So I'd be hesitant to jump above 4 because then we would definitely be an outlier in terms of the neighboring districts. But I think increasing it from $3 to what I suggest, whether it's $3.50 or 4, is reasonable. To jump to that $4.50 just because that's the rate at which the federal government is reimbursing, I think would make us really way above the average.
And Mrs. Brown, if I could just also interject, remember that rate is for students who are below the poverty threshold, which is fairly low, particularly for this area. We have a number of families who are just above that threshold, who I think will struggle to pay for lunch again. So it's finding that sweet spot where we're meeting our expenses, but also not making it impossible for families who don't qualify for free lunch to have lunch at all.
So I guess it's a board, so do we make that decision now, or do we make it?
I'd like to make that decision at the August meeting. I
Okay.
was hoping this evening we just have some more conversation about it. And then at the August 23rd meeting, if the board's willing to go along with the recommendation to increase then we would do that. I just would like to just divulge if it's something that has to be formally done in a resolution or not.
Yeah, okay, so if, I guess I would request, because I'm not sure how things get onto the agenda.
Yeah.
But I would request that a resolution regarding the increase in food service prices be placed on the agenda for the August 23rd meeting. If that's how we have to do it.
Mr. Bowles, is that appropriate to do a resolution on that?
It is.
Excellent, okay, I have a couple more questions. Can I keep going?
Yes.
I was at a law conference last week, so a lot of these questions are just things that they've talked to us about, so now I'm going to ask you to make sure we're all up to snuff. There is some talk about silent signals and panic alarms must now be considered, potentially required. They didn't say required, but they said considered by health and safety teams. Either do we have silent signal or panic alarm systems, or, we do. So we have them.
We do, yeah.
Okay, great. I did notice that our use of schools procedure has changed. So I guess my question is that just an internal change where we internally change the process, or is it a change that affects entities that want to use our buildings?
It affects outside entities as well, Mrs. Rona, and in fact, over the past few weeks, our team, the people who deal with that approval form, particularly as they interface with outside agencies, have emailed all the agencies with the new procedures, with how to set up a username and password, with how to get help if they need help, and they've been working with them so that they're prepared for the changes as well, and it will make the process much more efficient.
Okay, good, because that's my question, is that, or my thoughts, I need to educate people for changing the process. Okay, a couple of grants that we heard about. There's an ESOL grant out there, a Recover from COVID grant that's in addition to ARP. Those are both through SED. And there's reimbursement from SED for mental hygiene grants. Just wondering if we have applied for any or all of those, if we qualify for them?
So we regularly, both of our offices get notification of new grants. I can't speak off the top of my head to those three, but we regularly look at and review what we are eligible for and apply for those. We are frequently not eligible because most of those grants from SED are directed at high-need districts. But we apply for everything high-need. High-need. And we regularly, we apply for everything that we're eligible for.
Okay, great. And have we updated our ESSA report as is required? We had, I guess it was due on June 30th, maybe?
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Excellent. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is, we had talked last fall about the goals, the board doing goals for the 2022-23 school year. So I'm not sure how we do that. So Ann or Dr. Gallagher, it seems to me if we're gonna do them, we should do them now, like over the summer or you know, as soon as we can, so that they're, but I don't know, is that a public process that they are, or do we meet exactly, talk about them, and then come and report publicly? Do you know? Okay, I'm sorry to hear about this stuff today. All right,
So I believe that board goals that deal with how the board functions together are appropriate to discuss in executive session. But board goals that are directed at the 39,000-foot view of where you'd like the district to move, those would be public. So I would suggest that if the board is, if you're correct, you're going to work on those goals now, either of those types. That should be now, because then we begin doing district goals, which I usually finalize with our administrative team during our retreat in the very beginning of the school year.
okay, so then again, I would ask, however that process happens, that we maybe put that on. Is everybody gonna be here for the August? Or do we have kids who are going on to college? I would put that we put either, you know, that we have some kind of a work, maybe the August meeting is not a good meeting to do it, because it's so otherwise busy, but, that we get this on an agenda so that we can get those moving along.
Maybe we can meet in exec to discuss it in August and then talk about it publicly in September.
Right.
That would work for everybody on the board.
The only difficulty with that is, again, we usually do the district goals
Right.
ready by September. So you may want to back that up a little bit. If the district goal, if you want the district goals to flow from the districts.
So then, do we need to talk about it in executive before we discuss it publicly?
Well, just what Dr. Gallagher just said is, if it's our goals for the district, like kids come first, that would seem to me that that's something that we need to talk about publicly, but if it's how we are gonna interface as a board, I think, is that what you
That's
just said?
correct.
I don't know the rules,
Yes.
I don't know the rules, I'm not saying, I just say parity when
So we can discuss it in August.
So I guess that'll be on my old business in August. So just so we can all think about it and have a discussion about it.
I agree. Any other Board of Education comments? Questions and comments from the public? Any announcements from the Long Beach Classroom Teachers Association? Administrative, Supervisory, and PBS Group? LBCA? PTA, Parent Teacher Association? Okay, if not, I would like to go make a motion and go into exec.
Second.
Okay, we will come back to adjourn our public session after our executive meeting.
Let's take the vote.
Oh, can we take a vote to go into exec? Dr. Ryan?
I,
I vote yes.
Look,
Yes,
enough here
please.
reason for you to stay, yes.
Ms. Verona?
Nothing exciting going on.
Ms. Fitto?
Yes.
And I vote yes, we do not need to stay. All right, thank you.
Hey, Michelle. It's fine, good.
Everybody go around. No, not yet. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Bye, nice meeting you. I don't think so, no. What are you saying? Yeah, absolutely, yeah, I'll do that.